The night my wolf first slipped his own kingdom, I thought a thief had gotten in. I woke to the sound of the postern gate, not the groan of it swinging wide, but the softer, guiltier sound of it being nosed open, the way a hound works a latch it has watched a man work 100 times. There is a particular click the iron makes when it is lifted slowly by something that does not want to be heard. I had never heard my own gate make it before. By the time I reached the wall, the courtyard lay empty, and the moon spread flat and white across the stones. And there, printed in the thin frost, were the broad tracks of a wolf leaving his own hold at a trot, as though he had somewhere to be and was already late. I am the Alpha King of Greymore. Nothing leaves this hill without my leave, not a cart, not a courier, not a hunting party, and least of all the beast that shares my blood. He is not a pet. He is not a hound at my heel. He is the other half of my own self, the four-footed shape my nature takes under the moon, and where I go he goes, and what I want he wants, the way the two halves of a bell are one sound. And yet there were his prints in the frost, bold as a signature, going down the switchback road toward the town of Larkfield in the valley, where the lamps had long gone dark and honest folk were deep in sleep. I did not raise the guard. A king who cannot govern his own wolf does not announce it to his sentries. I pulled on my boots and my plainest cloak, the undyed one, the one a man wears when he wants to be no one, and I went down the hill after him on my own 2 feet, and I told myself I was angry, and I was, a little. But mostly I was baffled, and a man is never so dangerous to his own dignity as when he is baffled. Larkfield is a craft town, all narrow lanes and shuttered stalls, built where the river slows enough to turn a mill. By day it smells of tanbark and wood smoke and river mud and hot iron. By night it smells only of cold. I followed the tracks past the cooper's yard with its stacked staves, past the smithy where the banked forge still breathed a faint red, past the chandler's, and the little humpbacked bridge where the mill race runs fast and black. The prince never wavered. He was not casting about, not sniffing his way. He went straight, at that same purposeful trot, a creature who knew exactly where he was going and had gone there before. That was the first thing that troubled me, not that he had gone somewhere. The tracks turned at last down a crooked little lane whose leaning sign named it Saddler's Lane. And there, at the third door, my wolf lay curled against the threshold like a dog that had come home to a house it had lived in all its life. He was not hunting. He was not hurt. He had traveled the better part of 2 leagues in the killing cold to lie down against a stranger's door and sleep, and when he heard me come up the lane he lifted his great gray head and looked at me with an expression I can only call caught. And then, unforgivably, he did not move. He set his chin back down upon his crossed forepaws and watched me sidelong, and the meaning was so plain he might as well have spoken it. You may go home if you like. I am staying. Get up, I said. He sighed through his nose, a long, weary put-upon sound. I want you to understand how strange this was. In all my 33 years he had never once had to be told a thing twice, because there had never been a thing I wanted that he did not want with me. His will was my will. When my council paraded their daughters before me, season upon season, and I felt nothing, it was his nothing I felt, the great settled stillness of a beast who has looked and found no reason to rise. I had come, over the years, to a quiet and private conclusion in the part of a man he does not say aloud, that there was simply no mate for me in the world, that some kings are built without that particular door, and that I had best make my peace with the cold of it the way you make peace with a lame leg. You stop expecting it to run. And now here he was, disobeying me, over a leatherworker's doorstep. And the truly frightening thing, the thing that undid me more than any defiance could have, was that for the first time in my life he and I wanted 2 entirely different things, and I did not yet have the wit to know that he was the one who was right. The door opened. I will confess I had my hand near my knife. A door opening at that hour to 2 dark shapes in a lane tends to end in shouting or worse. But there was no shouting. A woman stood in the doorway in a plain wool wrap thrown over her shift, a candle cupped in one hand, her hair in a loose night braid over one shoulder, and she looked down at my wolf, down at a beast the size of a yearling colt, down at jaws that had emptied great halls of grown warriors. And she said, in the mild, scolding, thoroughly unimpressed tone of a woman addressing a cat that has once again brought a dead bird up onto the bed, "Oh, it's you again. Again." The word went through me like river water in winter. She crouched. She crouched, folded herself down within easy reach of teeth that could have taken her arm off at the shoulder, and she scratched my wolf behind one ear, exactly where he can never reach himself, and he leaned the whole massive weight of his head into her palm and made a sound I had not heard out of him since he was a fat and foolish pup, a low, rolling, undignified groan of pure animal contentment. His tail rose and fell against the frozen stone, thump, 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 like a slow drum. "You can't keep coming here," she told him, in the tone of a lecture much repeated and never once heeded. "You'll frighten Nia's hens, and then she'll want you gone, and I won't have that, so you shall have to learn to behave." And then she looked up and saw me at last, a big man in a colorless cloak, standing in her lane at the wrong end of the night, and to her lasting credit she did not scream. She only rose, slow and deliberate, and shifted the candle to keep its small light between us, and laid her free hand flat on the wolf's shoulder in a way I understood, a heartbeat later, to be protective. Of him. From me. "Is he yours?" she asked. I opened my mouth to say yes, and found the word oddly, absurdly hard to reach. Because standing there in the cold it did not feel true. He had chosen a door I had never seen. He answered to a voice that was not mine. In what sense, exactly, was he mine, if he crossed a flooded valley in the dark to lie at another's threshold and would not rise when I commanded it? "He is," I managed at last. "I'm sorry he got out." "He gets out a great deal," she said, and there was no accusation in it, only a kind of tired, exasperated fondness, the fondness you feel for a thing that is a nuisance precisely because you have grown to like it. "This is the 4th time, or the 5th. I've rather lost count." She tipped her head, studying the wolf, not me. "He turned up the first time near 3 weeks back, half-drowned, came up out of the river like something the flood had swallowed and spat back, and stood on my step dripping and shaking, too proud to whine about it. And I thought, well, I can hardly leave the poor great thing to freeze in my own doorway, so I let him in by the fire to dry. And now," she said, with the air of a woman explaining a debt she never agreed to, "he believes he lives here." "He believes," I began. "He believes he lives here," she said again firmly. "Don't you?" And the wolf thumped his tail against the stones, shameless, agreeing with her entirely. 3 weeks. 3 weeks my wolf had been going out my postern gate in the deep of the night to sit by a stranger's fire in a town I ruled but never walked, and I had slept through every single one of them. That was the part I could not get past, standing there with my breath smoking in the cold. Not that he had gone beast stray, but that he had gone quietly. That my chest, the place where he and I are one voice and have always been one voice, had not so much as murmured it to me. As though some deep part of myself had known exactly where he went, night after night, and had kept the secret carefully from the rest of me. As though I had been keeping a thing from my own self. "He hasn't troubled you?" I asked. It was a foolish question to ask about an animal that could have pulled her roof down around her ears, but I did not know what else to say, and I found I very badly did not want to simply take him and go. "Troubled me?" She considered this with real seriousness, as though it were a fair question deserving a fair answer. "He ate a week of my kitchen scraps and half a ham I'd have sworn was out of his reach. He sheds enough gray hair to stuff a bolster. He frightened the tanner's boy so badly the child dropped a full bucket, though the tanner's boy frightens if you look at him sideways. So I don't lay that entirely at the wolf's door." She paused. "And he mended a bridle." I looked at her. "He didn't mend it," she allowed, catching my face. "I'll not claim that. I mean he carried it. I'd hung a torn bridle on the door peg to shame myself into seeing to it. I'm a saddler, you understand, and there's nothing worse than a saddler with her own tack in rags. It's a cobbler with holes in his boots. And one morning it was simply gone off the peg. vanished. And that same night your wolf comes trotting up the lane grand as a lord and lays the thing down at my feet like he's done me a mighty service, tail going, waiting to be praised. Her mouth twitched. He chewed the broken strap clean off, ruined it past all saving, but she looked at the wolf with an exasperated tenderness I would come, over the following weeks, to understand entirely. It was kindly meant, so I praised him. What else could I do with a creature that brings you a bridle in the night to make things right? I stood in the freezing lane and looked down at my wolf, the terror of two war hosts, the beast whose howls scattered the raiders of the Eastern Reach. And I understood that he had, at some point in the last 3 weeks, without my leave or knowledge, taken up the leather trade. "What is your name?" I asked her. "Tamsin," she said. And here is the thing I have turned over in my mind more times than any other in all the years since. She did not ask mine. She did not look up the hill. In Larkfield they do not always. The hill is the hill and the town is the town, and a man in a plain undyed cloak on Saddler's Lane at midnight is simply a man in a plain cloak, come to fetch his stray. And I'll thank you to take your wolf home, King or Carter or whatever you are, before he wakes my sister. She's up before the birds as it is, and she needs her sleep more than either of us needs to stand here in the cold arguing over a dog that thinks he's a house guest. King or Carter. She said it the way you'd say dead or alive or rain or shine, a phrase to cover every case and meaning nothing at all by either half of it. She did not know. That was the whole marvel of it, and I did not yet know how rare and how precious a thing I was being handed. To be looked at once by someone who had not first looked at the crown. To be, for the space of one cold conversation, only a man with a difficult wolf. "Come," I said to him. He did not come. "Come," I said again, and put the low weight of the pack into the word, the tone that turns fighting men to stone, that has stopped a charge and quieted a mob. He rose at last, with the slow, elaborate insolence of a creature obliging you strictly as a personal favor and wanting you to know it. He pressed his head once more deliberately into Tamsin's hand, and then he walked to my side, and all the long way back up the switchback road in the graying dark he kept turning his great head to look back over his shoulder at the third door on Saddler's Lane, and I felt in my chest, faint but unmistakable, a thing I had no name for, a pull, the wrong way. As though a leash had somehow got itself round my neck instead of his, and the far end of it was tied to a candle-lit door in a town I had ruled all my life and never once walked at night. I told myself, climbing, that I would have the postern gate barred at sundown. I did not have the postern gate barred at sundown. I should tell you what kind of king I was before her, so that what came after can make its own sense. I was 33 and I had no mate, and my counsel spoke of it the way a careful household speaks of a soft place in the roof, a fault to be mended before the whole timber goes to rot and the rain comes in on everyone. Every season they brought me lunas, the poised, lovely, high-born daughters of allied packs, schooled from the cradle in how to stand beside a throne and never once put a foot wrong. And every season I received each of them with perfect courtesy, and felt in my chest the great settled no of my wolf, and sent them home again with gifts and good escort, and the matter of the king's marriage left exactly where it had always been. It was not pride. Men assume a king who will not wed is holding out for something finer than what he's offered, some rarer jewel. It was simpler and colder than that. My wolf would not stir. He lay in me like a stone dropped down a deep well, and I had come, quietly, to believe there was no woman in the world who would move him. That the door other men have, the one that opens on a mate, had simply been left out of me when I was made, and that I would rule alone and die alone, and that this was merely the shape of my particular life, no more to be wept over than a man weeps over having brown eyes instead of blue. And then a torn bridle, a half-drowned wolf, a woman in a doorway saying, "Oh, it's you again," as if my whole cold certainty were a thing she could scratch behind the ears. I did not go back the next night. I tell you that plainly so you'll believe I tried. I sat in my hall and did the work of a king, heard a dispute over a boundary stone, signed a grant of grazing, listened to my steward fret about the winter grain, and I did not go down the hill, and I congratulated myself on my discipline right up until the black hour before dawn, when I woke to the soft, guilty click of the postern latch and knew, with a sinking and entirely ridiculous certainty, that he had gone again. And this time he had not even done me the courtesy of taking me with him. I lay still in the dark, and I let him go. And this, I have never told this to another soul, and I set it down now only because it is the truest thing I know about that season. This was the strangest sensation of my life. To lie awake in my own cold bed on my own high hill and feel him grow distant. To feel the pull between us, the bond of shared blood, thin and stretch and lengthen as he loped down the road. And then to feel it arrive, to feel his contentment come humming back up the leash to me, faint and warm, when he reached her door and lay down and was let in by the fire. I lay in the dark 2 leagues away and felt, second-hand, borrowed, stolen, the warmth of a hearth I had not lit, in a house I had no right to enter, beside a woman I had spoken to exactly once. He came home at the gray of dawn smelling of tanbark and wood smoke, and underneath it all faintly of her, of oil and clean wool and something warm I could not name. And I lay there and I will say it because I have never once lied to myself about her, and I do not mean to start now at my age. I was jealous of my own wolf. Bitterly, foolishly jealous of a beast for the warmth he would not share, for the door that opened to him and not to me, for a scratch behind the ear from a hand I had watched once in candlelight. So I did what a jealous man and a poor king does. I found myself a reason. There was, I decided over my solitary breakfast, the matter of a saddle. The tree of the saddle on my gray war mount had cracked at the offside skirt. This was true. It had, some weeks back, and while a king has any number of saddlers within his own gates who would sell their own mothers for the honor of the work, I found, on grave reflection, that none of them could be entirely trusted with a task so particular and so dear to me. The only hands in the whole of Graymore equal to it, as chance and my own contriving would have it, belonged to a certain leatherworker on Saddler's Lane in the town of Larkfield. I rode down the next morning like an honest man on honest business. My wolf trotted at my stirrup the whole way with his whole body singing, his ears up, his stride light as a pup's, and I hated him for reading me so easily, and I understood him completely, because my own foolish heart was doing the very same thing. The workshop by daylight was a wholly different country from the dark steppe I'd met her on. Small and bright and warm with the good smells of neatsfoot oil and cut leather, and the cold green smell of grass off the fields behind. Harness hung in dark loops from the low beams, bridles, girths, breastplates, a fine wide cart collar half-stitched. A whole wall of tools caught the light, awls and edgers and creasers and round knives and a row of pricking irons, every last one of them worn smooth and bright at the handle by years of a hand that knew exactly what it was for. And there, at her bench sat Tamsin, an awl in her fist, and a strip of rain pin taut under her elbow, the very picture of a person who has never in her life been idle. And beside her, on a stool, a younger girl, 16, 17, no more, with the same clear brown eyes and a warm scatter of freckles, and at the sight of the enormous gray animal filling their doorway, a look of the frankest possible astonishment. "That's the wolf," the girl said. "That's the wolf," Tamsin agreed, not lifting her eyes from her stitching, drawing the wax thread through with a small practiced hiss. "And that, unless I'm much mistaken, would be whoever the wolf belongs to, come to fetch him in daylight this time, which is a great improvement, and I'll say so." And now she looked up. And I watched the knowledge arrive in her face the way weather comes over a hill, the horse behind me, the cut and quality of the cloak beneath the plain one, some weight I have never in my life been able to set down even when I most wished to. I watched her understand. "Oh," she said very quietly, "oh no. Tamsin, said the girl in a strangled whisper half rising off her stool. Tamsin, that's the king. I know what he is, Tamsin said. And she set her all down flat upon the bench, and she stood, and she did the small and ordinary and terrible thing that every living soul in my life does, and that I had, for one single midnight, been spared. She looked at the crown that was not even upon my head, and she dropped her eyes to the floor, and all the easy exasperated warmth went out of her like heat out of a room when a door is left open on the snow. Your Grace, forgive me. Forgive me, if I'd have known it was your own beast I'd never have let him pass the step. I'd have brought him up the hill to you myself the very first night. I never meant to presume. I never dreamed. You didn't presume, I said, and I heard my own voice come out rougher than I meant it. He presumed. He does that. It is his single greatest talent. And because I could not bear the sight of her folded down small like that, all her marvelous ease gone out of her, I said too quickly the very lie I had ridden 2 leagues down a cold hill to tell. I've come about a saddle. She lifted her eyes. She looked, quite deliberately, at the very good saddle on the very fine gray horse standing in her lane. Then she looked back at me. And she was not a fool, she was, I would learn, very nearly the least foolish person I have ever known, and I watched her weigh the thing, and decide, with a kindness that undid me far worse than her scolding ever had, to let me keep my lie and my dignity both. Of course, your Grace, she said gravely. A saddle, naturally. Come in out of the cold then, and let me see the poor beast that has to carry it. Nia, the good stool, the one without the wobble. I ducked under the low lintel into the warm dark of her shop, and my wolf came in at my very heel. And then, without so much as a glance at either of us, without the smallest ceremony, he crossed the swept floor directly to a low, broad basket in the far corner that was heaped to the brim with soft offcuts and curls and scraps of leather, and he climbed into it, and turned himself around 3 full times and lay down, and let out the enormous, bone-deep, wholly satisfied sigh of a creature who has at very long last succeeded in herding every last one of his stubborn charges into the one room where they properly belong. He does that, Tamsin said, before she could stop herself, and just for one moment before she remembered again what I was, before the Your Grace came back down between us like a portcullis, she almost smiled at me. The two of us caught together over the head of that ridiculous animal in the simple absurdity of him. And I tell you truly, I would have traded a fat and fertile province for that half a smile. And I did not yet have the sense God gave a goose to be frightened of how badly I wanted it. The saddle, I will confess, did not take nearly so long as I contrived to make it take. I came back for a fitting that needed no fitting at all. I came back to approve a color of thread, holding 2 nearly identical browns to the light with the gravity of a man choosing a battle line, while Tamsin watched me with her mouth held very carefully straight. I came back once, with the frank and threadbare excuse that I had merely happened to be passing, through a town I had no earthly business in, on a lane that led precisely nowhere except to her door, and thence to a stone wall. My counsel began to remark, delicately at first and then less so, upon the king's sudden and consuming interest in the leather trade. My steward, a good and careful old man who has known me since I was a boy, asked me one evening with enormous and painful tact whether his Grace was quite well, whether his Grace was perhaps sleeping poorly, whether there was anything at all that his Grace's steward might do to ease whatever it was that took his Grace down the hill so very often of late. His Grace was not quite well. His Grace was a man of 33 who had believed himself a locked and empty house all his life, and had just discovered a window standing open on a lit room, and could not for his soul stop going to look at it. Because here is what I learned in those weeks, coming down my hill on my thin and worsening pretexts. I learned about her, and every single thing I learned drove the last false comfort of my old cold certainty a little further out of me. I learned that Tamsin and her sister Nia had run that shop alone for 6 years. Since the winter their father took a cough that would not leave his chest, and left it at last only by leaving the world along with it. I learned that Tamsin had been 19 years old when she took up her father's all and her father's debts in the very same week, and had carried both ever since, and had kept 2 girls fed and roofed, and decently clothed on the strength of her own 2 oil-stained hands and nothing else. I learned that she was, past any argument, the finest leather worker in 3 river valleys, and that she knew it perfectly well and would sooner bite through her own thread than say it aloud, and that lords from a day's ride off sent quietly to Larkfield for her harness, though not one of them would have admitted at his own table where the work came from. I learned that she sang badly, tunelessly, happily, when she believed there was no one near enough to hear, and stopped the instant she suspected otherwise. I learned that she saved the hard crusts and the bacon rind for a lame black crow that came each morning to the sill, and that she called, with no ceremony whatever, Crow. I learned that she had a temper she kept on a very short lead, and a laugh she kept on a shorter one still, so that when the laugh did slip its lead it seemed to surprise her every bit as much as it surprised anyone else, bursting out of her before she could catch it. And Nia. I learned Nia too. The younger sister was quick and warm and terrible at keeping still, with none of Tamsin's held in gravity. She chattered while she worked the simpler stitching. She teased her sister mercilessly. She had a young cooper named Watt who found a great many reasons of his own to pass the end of Saddler's Lane, over which Nia pretended to a fine indifference that fooled precisely no one, least of all Tamsin. It was Nia who thawed to me first, king or no king. A boy her sister might be sweet on was of vastly more interest to Nia than any crown, and it was Nia who, when Tamsin was out of the room, told me half the things above in a rushed conspiratorial whisper, with the pointed and hopeful air of a girl selling her elder sister's virtues to a likely buyer. But it was the other thing I learned that mattered most, the thing I saw with my own eyes, again and again, and did not understand the meaning of until it was very nearly too late. I learned that every beast in Larkfield came to her. The lame crow, of course, but that was only the beginning. There was the tanner's dog, a great scarred brindled brute that had put its teeth into 3 grown men, and was kept chained at the tan yard for the safety of the town. And that dog, when Tamsin walked the river path, would strain the length of its chain not to lunge but to reach her, whining like a pup, and lie down flat and roll when she came near, and let her rub its scarred belly while the tanner stood by shaking his head and swearing he'd not have believed it if he hadn't watched it with his own 2 eyes. "Bit me to the bone, that dog," he told me once, not knowing me. "Bit my brother worse. Won't so much as growl at her. I've give up trying to make sense of it." There was a colt at the coaching inn, a leggy nervous chestnut that no groom could hold to be shod. It fought the farrier so wildly they'd twice given it up half done, and I watched Tamsin, sent for as a last resort before the beast was sold for meat, go into that loose box alone. She did not fight it. She did not soothe it with her voice, particularly, or bribe it, or corner it. She simply went in and stood and went still, a great, deep, waiting stillness, her hands loose and open at her sides, her weight easy, asking nothing. And she let the colt decide in its own time and on its own terms that her stillness was a safe place to come and stand. It took the better part of an hour. She never hurried it once, and at the end of that hour the chestnut stood with its trembling nose pressed into the hollow of her shoulder and let the farrier lift and shoe all 4 feet without a single fight, while I stood at the box door and forgot entirely that I was a king. And there was the mule. The mule was the one that broke my understanding open, though I didn't know it yet. A carter's mule, half-wild, iron-mouthed, that had kicked in the ribs of one saddler trying to fit it and put another through a stall board. A genuinely dangerous animal, not merely a frightened one, the kind of beast a sensible man does not go near. The carter brought it to Tamsin because there was no one else left in 3 valleys who would touch it. And I, being a fool in love and finding some new pretext to be underfoot in her yard that day, watched her fit a full harness to that murderous animal from collar to crupper, watched her work all round it, under it, behind it, at the very ends of it where a kick would kill, murmuring low and unhurried, her hands quiet and certain, taking her time, and the mule that had crippled two men stood for her like a lamb at a fair, one ear cocked back to listen to her, and never so much as shifted its weight. "How?" I said when the carter had led the beast away, still marveling. "How do you do that? I've kept war horses. I've broken hard mounts. I've never seen anything like it in my life." Tamsin looked at me, wiping her hands on her apron, and she seemed honestly puzzled by the question, as though I'd asked her how she breathed. "I don't do anything," she said. "That's the whole of it if you want the truth. Everyone's always doing something at them, pulling and shouting and forcing and hurrying, and the poor creature can feel every bit of the fear and the temper behind it, and it fears and tempers right back. I just stop. I stop doing anything at all, and I let the animal see there's nothing coming at it. And then I wait. Most beasts have never once in their lives had a person simply wait for them, so they come. Not because I've a gift," she shrugged and picked up her awl, "because I'm the first one who ever bothered to hold still." I have turned that answer over more times than I can count, and I have come to believe it was the truest and the deepest thing anyone has ever said to me, and that she did not think it deep at all. Because of course my wolf had chosen her. Of course. He was only the first of them, the boldest, the one great heart brave enough to swim a flood in the dark to reach the one door in all the world where a hunted, weary, watchful creature could at last set down the whole crushing weight of itself and simply rest, because there was, at that door, a person who would only hold still and wait, and want nothing from it but its own contentment. Every beast in Larkfield already knew what she was. The lame crow knew. The scarred dog knew. The wild mule knew. It had taken the Alpha King of Greymoor, with all his ancient blood and all his heavy crown, longer than any dumb animal in the valley to work out the plainest fact in the world. The council brought me a Luna that month. I should tell you about the Luna, because it is the day I finally understood, and I understood it through my own wolf. Her name I will not give, because she was blameless in all of it and deserves no unkindness from this telling, a truly lovely woman, gracious and clever and kind, the daughter of our strongest ally to the north, and my council was frankly delirious with hope. They arrayed the great hall for her coming. They lit every candle in the place. They sat me on my own high seat and stood her before me in cloth of silver with moonstones in her dark hair. And she was, by any measure a man could name, everything a king could rightly want in a queen. And my wolf lay at the foot of my chair. I'd brought him up from the town for it, some grim instinct in me wanting the test, and he did not lift his head. He did not growl, he did not bristle, he was not rude, he simply could not be made to care. This graceful, gifted, high-born woman stood before us both in all her silver, and my wolf regarded her with the flat, mild, faintly bored attention he'd give a tapestry he had seen 1,000 times. And then he put his chin back on his paws and looked instead, longingly, at the great doors of the hall, at the doors, and past them, and down the hill, toward a crooked lane and a warm little shop and a low basket full of leather scraps that he plainly considered his true and only home. And I sat on my high seat and looked at that beautiful, blameless woman my council so badly wanted me to want, and I felt in my chest the old familiar no, the settled stone, the closed door, and then I did a thing I had never once done before in all those seasons of Lunas. I let myself think of Tamsin, of oil-stained hands and a badly sung song, and oh, it's you again. And the stone in my chest was not a stone at all. It rolled aside. The door I had believed left out of me when I was made stood, all at once, wide open, and behind it was a lit room and a warm hearth and a woman holding still, and the whole of me strained toward it exactly as my wolf strained toward the hall doors, the two of us, for the first time in my life, wanting precisely and helplessly the very same thing, and it was not the woman in silver, and everyone in that hall could see it on my face. I sent the northern Luna home with every honor and a good escort and a gift fine enough to make my steward wince, and I was as gentle in the sending as a man can be, because none of it was her doing. And then I stood alone in my emptied hall with the candles guttering and my wolf's tail thumping the flagstones in shameless approval, and I said aloud to him, to the empty air, to my own thick and stubborn heart, You knew, you've known for 3 weeks. You went and found her the very first night, and you've been sitting at her door ever since, waiting for me to catch you up. He thumped his tail. You drowned yourself to find her, I said. You crossed a flood, and I've been holding 2 shades of brown thread to a window like a coward and calling it a saddle. He thumped his tail again, once with great finality, exactly like a judge bringing down a gavel upon a verdict that was never in the smallest doubt. You're starring, Tamsin told me, some afternoons later without once glancing up from the girth she was stitching. It had become like that between us in the shop. The crown had not gone away, she still your graced me at the door when I came, and I still hated the small sound of it, and outside those walls she kept a careful and proper distance. But inside, over the work, in the good smell of oil and grass, some easier thing had grown up between us, quietly and without either of us nomming it, the way moss grows over a stone it means one day to cover entirely. I'm supervising, I said. The saddle is a matter of state. The saddle, said Tamsin, has been finished a fortnight. It's on that peg there. It has been on that peg. You've paid for it twice, once by accident when you left too much and wouldn't hear of taking the change, and once on purpose when I tried to give the first overpayment back, and you flatly refused it. So by my reckoning the crown of Graymore now owns roughly 3/4 of a saddle it has never once put on a horse, and a worn dent in my second-best stool. She snipped her wax thread clean with her teeth and looked up at me at last, level and unhurried, in exactly the way she looked at the mule. So it was never the saddle, was it? I could have lied. I was good at lying. I had been a king a long time. But she had set down her all, and she was doing to me the very thing she did to every frightened creature that ever came to her yard, holding perfectly still, asking nothing, waiting, letting me decide in my own time, and on my own terms whether her stillness was a safe place to come and stand. No, I said, it was never the saddle. In the corner, in the basket of scraps he had long since claimed as his sovereign territory, my wolf lifted his head. I felt his whole attention swing round to me, felt something in him go taut and glad and eager, the way a good hound goes taut when the horn finally sounds the one note it has been straining after all the long cold morning. Now, said every line of him, now you have it. It only took you a whole season and a woman in silver to see what I saw in a single night through a flood. Your wolf, Tamsin said carefully, watching my face and not the wolf, isn't really lost. When he comes here, is he? No. He comes, she said slowly, working it out aloud the way she worked out the mule, gentling toward the truth, because you want to come, and you send him down instead of coming yourself, because a wolf can turn up at a saddler's door in the dark and it's only a stray and no harm done. And no one need ever know. She was not accusing me. There was no edge in it at all. But a king can't. A king coming down that hill to a leatherworker's shop over and over, that would be a thing. That would be talked of. So you sent the wolf and told yourself it was the wolf's doing. She looked at me and something in her face was very gentle and very sad. That's a lonely way to court a person, your grace, through a beast, from 2 leagues off, in the dark. And there it was, court. The word neither of us had once let into that warm room in all those weeks, standing now in the very middle of the swept floor between us, plain as a third person come to visit. And my wolf brought his tail down against the side of his basket, once hard, like a gavel. I have faced war hosts drawn up in the dawn. I have stood on the wall with the arrows already black in the air, and not once flinched. I have never in the whole of my life been so afraid as I was in that small bright shop, with the word court laid out on the floor between us, and a leatherworker looking at me with her terrible unhurried kindness, waiting, only waiting, to see whether I would find the courage to pick the word up, or whether I would step over it and mutter something about the saddle, and ride back up my hill and be a cold and empty house for the rest of my given days. I don't know how to do this, I said. It is not a thing a king says. It was the truest thing I had ever said aloud to another living soul. I have had them bring me lunas since I was 20 years old, I said, and once I had begun I found I could not stop, the whole of it coming out of me at once in that warm room. Beautiful women, Good women, clever and gracious, women any sane man would count himself blessed by. And he, I gestured at the wolf, at the great gray traitor in his stolen basket, he never stirred. Not once. Not for a single one of them in all those years. And I felt his stillness as my own, and I decided, somewhere along the way, that it meant there was simply no door in me for this, that I'd been built without the room that some men are, and that I had best make my peace with ruling alone and dying alone, and I did. I made my peace with it. It stopped even hurting. And then one night I hear my own gate open in the dark, and I follow my own wolf 2 leagues down a cold hill, and there you are in a doorway telling him he'll frighten the hens, and he lies down at your feet and groans like a pup, and you say, "Oh, it's you again," and something I'd sworn was dead in me these 10 years I stopped. My hands were not entirely steady, and I, who have never in my life let another see my hands shake, let her see it. He knew Tamsin before I did. He's known 3 weeks more. He kept it from me. I understand that now because he knew that if he told me plainly I'd argue and reason and be a king about it and ruin the whole thing before it began. So he didn't tell me. He just went and found you and lay down at your door and waited for me to be fool enough to follow him. My own wolf has been courting you on my behalf for the better part of a month because he could not trust me not to make a wreck of it myself. And he was right not to trust me. That is the plain truth of it. He is the wiser half of me, and he always has been, and he found you while I was still telling myself I had no heart to find you with. There was a silence in the shop, a long one. And then from the back room, where she had very plainly been listening to every single word with both ears pressed flat to the door, Nia said, in a small strangled voice, "Tamsin." "Hush, Nia," said Tamsin, but she did not once take her eyes from mine. And whatever it was she saw there, whatever a woman who can read the fear in a killer mule and the grief in a lame crow reads in the face of a king who has just handed her, open-palmed, every soft and unguarded thing in him, it made her set her work aside entirely and rise from her bench and cross the little floor to stand before me. Close, closer than your grace had ever once let her stand, and look up. "I'm a leather worker," she said. Her voice was steady, but I had learned by then to hear the held-in things under it. "I've a debt still on this shop, near paid but still owing. I've a sister to see safe and settled. I've hands that will never come clean of oil no matter how hard I scrub them of a Sunday. I am not a Luna, your grace. I don't know the first blessed thing about standing beside a throne, and I'll tell you honestly I've no great wish to learn it. And if you're asking me what I think your wolf's been asking me these 3 weeks," her voice caught, only slightly, and she mastered it, "then hear my answer whole because I'll give it only once. I won't be carried up that hill like a prize won at a fair. I won't give up this shop, not for you, not for a crown, not for anything. This shop is my father's hands in my own 6 years, and it is mine. And I will not be your secret. I won't be a thing sent for after dark and slipped in the postern gate like a stray, to be enjoyed where no one can see and set aside where everyone can. I have had quite enough of being courted through a wolf. If you want me, King of Graymore, then you'll want the whole of me, the oil and the debt and the sister and the shop. And you'll want it in the daylight, up the front road, where every soul in this town can see you do it." "Then be courted through the man," I said. I had never in my life asked another person for anything. Kings do not ask, they command, and the world rearranges itself around the command, and that is the whole cold luxury and the whole cold loneliness of the thing. But I had learned in that shop, watching her hold still in a loose box until a killer mule chose to trust her, that there is a kind of strength that looks from the outside exactly like patience, and that the only things in this world truly worth the having cannot be commanded at all. They can only be asked for, and then waited for, quietly, with your 2 hands open and empty, and your whole self held still. "I'm asking you," I said. "Not the wolf, me, my own 2 feet and my own thick heart. I'll come in the daylight. I'll come the long way up the front of this town, past every shudder and every gossip, where not one soul could mistake what I'm about. And I'll keep coming not to fetch a stray, not on a lie about a saddle, but as a man walking up a lane to a shop where the woman he wants is at her bench. And I'll keep coming until you're good and sick of the sight of me, or until you're not." and whatever you decide at the end of it, the shop stays yours. The hands stay yours. The name stays yours. I will never once send a beast to do the work my own courage ought to do. That's the asking, Tamsin. There's no crown in it and no throne in it. Only a man who took a whole season and a woman in silver to learn what his wolf knew the first wet night he ever swam a flood to reach you. She looked at me for a very long time. And in the corner, my traitorous, faithful, immeasurably wiser wolf climbed up out of his basket of stolen scraps and crossed the swept floor, and lay himself down across both our feet at once, hers and mine together, pinning us there with 14 stone of warm gray certainty, as if to say, "There. Now, neither of you can go anywhere. You are welcome." Tamsin laughed. It got loose all at once, the way it always did, bursting out of her before she could catch it and surprising her fully as much as it surprised me. And then her eyes were bright and wet, and she pressed the back of one oil-dark hand hard against her mouth, and she said, in a voice gone entirely unsteady, "He's ruined 3 of my best straps, you know. That wolf, chewing them. I've kept the count. I'll be sending the bill up the hill." "Send it up the hill," I said. "In daylight, by the front road. I'll answer it myself at the door with my hat in my hands." "I might," she said. She did. "I will not give you the whole of the courting that came after, because some of it belongs to no one but us two, and even an old king is allowed to keep a few doors closed against those who only want a good story out of him. But I will tell you how it ended, because I have come to believe that part is hers to have told. I came in the daylight. I came the long way, up the front road, and I let the whole of Larkfield watch the Alpha King of Graymore tie his own gray horse to the iron ring outside a saddler's shop with his own 2 hands, and duck under the low lintel with his hat held against his chest like any hopeful, nervous, ordinary man come courting. The first few times the whole lane came out to gape. Then they stopped gaping and started instead to be quietly and then fiercely proud of it. Our Tamsin, they took to saying up and down the market, our Tamsin off Saddler's Lane, and the king, if you please. Come down the front road bold as brass to sit on a stool in her shop like he'd nowhere finer to be. And I do believe that in the end the good folk of Larkfield were prouder of the match than I was myself, which is saying a very great deal, because I was prouder of it than of anything I have done before or since. Nia wept when at last Tamsin agreed to walk out with me openly, wept and laughed and flung her arms round her sister's neck and then, remembering, dropped me a wild curtsy and went scarlet. The lame crow, I am sorry to report, was entirely unmoved by any of it and merely wanted its crust. But the tanner's great scarred dog followed the 2 of us the whole length of the river path, the first evening we walked it together, wagging not just its tail but its entire hindquarters, and I have always chosen to take that as the truest blessing the town could give. The council did not, I will be honest, rejoice. A leatherworker, they said, low among themselves. A commoner. A girl with oil beneath her nails and a tradesman's debt on a shop in the valley. I heard them out, every last one of them, in full, with perfect courtesy, in the great hall where they had paraded all those lunas, and then I told them the one thing I had learned that season that was worth the knowing. Every frightened creature in 3 valleys, I said to my council, already knows this woman's worth. A colt no groom could hold is gentle in her hands. A dog that has bitten 3 men lies down at her feet and shows her its belly. A mule that crippled 2 grown saddlers stood for her like a lamb, because she is the first soul it ever met who would simply hold still and wait for it and want nothing from it. And my own wolf, my wolf, who would not so much as lift his head for the finest, highest-born Luna you ever set before me in this hall, my wolf swam a flood in the dead of a winter's night to lie down at her door, and has slept in a basket of her leather scraps every night he could contrive it since. If the whole animal kingdom of this valley has already reached its verdict upon Tamsin of Saddler's Lane, I said, then I do not think the noble council of Graymore is better placed to overrule it. I know I am not. They were quiet after that. Not humbled, I had no wish to humble them, and I want that understood. They were good men doing what they thought their duty, which was to see the roof of the kingdom mended before the rot came in, and they could not be blamed for failing to see that I had not patched the roof at all but found something far better to do with the house. They were simply quiet, the way sensible people fall quiet when they realize that a thing has already been settled by an authority a great deal higher and older and wiser than themselves. She did not give up the shop. That was among the very first of her conditions, spoken on the day I asked, and I would not have had it otherwise for all the world. A Tamsin without her bench and her awl and her wall of bright worn tools would not have been Tamsin at all, and it was Tamsin I wanted whole. To this very day, the finest harness in all of Graymore comes from a workshop on Saddler's Lane in the town below, where the king's own consort still keeps her bench and her round knife, and her row of pricking irons worn smooth by 6 years, and then 16 and then more, and where the lords of half the region still send quietly for their girth leather, and still pretend at their own tables that they have not the faintest idea where such fine work is got. Nia keeps the front of the shop now. She married her cooper, her Watt, in the spring after our own wedding, and has a brood of loud brown-eyed children who are all of them shamelessly spoiled by a king. And the old debt on the shop was paid off long ago. But not, Tamsin was iron on this with my gold. She paid it off herself with her own 2 hands over 2 more years of her own work, coin by honest coin, so that no living soul could ever say the shop had been bought for her or that she had come up the hill as a woman purchased. It had not been bought for her. Nothing about her was ever, in all the years I have loved her, a thing that could be bought, and that, if you want the whole of it set down in a single line, is the reason I love her, and always have, and always will. And the wolf. The wolf got precisely and entirely his way, which is of course what the wolf had been after from the very first wet night he ever hauled himself up out of that flood and stood dripping and shivering and stubborn on her step. He is old now, gray clear through the muzzle, slow on the switchback road he once ran so light, deaf in one ear and content to be. He sleeps most of the day in the corner of a warm shop that smells of neatsfoot oil and cut leather, and the cold green grass off the fields behind, in a low broad basket heaped with soft offcuts and curls and scraps, the very same basket, mended and relined a dozen times over, that he first stole his way into on the far-off afternoon I brought a lie about a saddle down that hill. He lies there while she works. He thumps his old tail slowly against the basket's side when she sings, badly, the same as ever, forgetting anyone can hear. And on winter nights, when the fire is lit and the shutters are closed against the cold and the town below is going dark window by window, I sit on the worn stool with its long familiar dent, the crown's dent. She calls it still, and my wife sits at her bench with an awl in her quiet, certain, oil-dark hands, and the old wolf sleeps in his basket of stolen leather in the warm space between us. And I think sometimes, watching the two of them in the firelight, of the man who once lay awake and cold in a high hold on a hill, and believed, with all his heart, that there was simply no door in him made for any of this. There was a door. There had been all along. I had only been looking for it in the wrong faces, up the wrong roads, waiting like a fool for it to be carried to me on a cushion by a council, in a hall full of candles and silver, when all the while it stood open on a crooked lane in the valley I ruled and never walked, in a shop that smelled of oil, behind a woman who would only hold still and wait, and want nothing from me but that I be content. My wolf found it first in the dark, and went out the postern gate to sit at it, and waited there, patient as she was patient with the mule, patient as she has been all these long years with me, for me to stop being a king for just long enough to follow him home. He always was the wiser half of me. I only wish it had not taken me a whole season, and a ruined bridle and a flooded river, and a woman in a doorway saying, "Oh, it's you again," to admit as much out loud.